Osio Negadawo. Hello, everyone. I'm really grateful for the forum today on this vitally important topic, and I'm just honored to present alongside esteemed colleagues, but also friends, Emily and Phaedra. So thanks for being here. I want to use my time to talk more broadly, rather than as specific as Dr. Ye spoke about her work, on this topic of indigenous rights and climate change. And I'll just open up with my perception of climate and the conversation that usually happens around this impending crisis or this ongoing and immediate crisis. So we're often confronted with climate change on the grand scale of global catastrophe. This scale of view tends to either erase geopolitical borders or, conversely, reify them. In other words, we either view the issue as we're all in this together, or we otherwise get caught up in the debates and actions of one nation state versus another. In each case, indigenous peoples and the unique challenges our communities face are obscured. Such challenges can include socioeconomic burdens, health disparities, political marginalization, all of which are part of the legacy of colonization that persists today, and which is tied to the dispossession of our lands that we continually regard as the very source of our economies, political sovereignty, and mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. What's more is that climate solutions are often framed in ways that do not account for the harm that colonial and industrial practices have caused indigenous communities and the land. In fact, they often exacerbate it. This is where Western technology and political institutions fall short in their hubris and failure to acknowledge the true roots of our current crisis, which lies in the breach of our relationships with the earth and all life. And this is what indigenous peoples have been saying for decades in international fora on sustainability and climate change mitigation. Consider the act of indigenous treaty making with settler states like the US and Canada. It's important to note that many indigenous nations signed treaties under coercive conditions that pressured them to cede their homelands. Nonetheless, treaties represent acts of political agency in which indigenous leaders asserted not only their retained rights to hunt, fish, and gather on the ceded portions of their homelands, but their responsibilities to caretake them and their more than human relatives in perpetuity. So, to invoke the work of Dakota scholar and former CU Boulder professor Vine Deloria Jr., for indigenous peoples, it's more about responsibilities than rights when it comes to living in reciprocal relationship with the earth. Now, this doesn't mean we have to eschew the rights framework entirely, but it does provide a compass for what this work could mean and how we might reimagine sustainable futures that are relational at their core. The rights of nature framework is a promising model which, although couched within the Western legal system, is a product of centering indigenous perspectives and granting personhood to bodies of water, mountains, and other natural features and beings so that they may be represented and advocated for within dominant legal and political venues. The Whanganui River, pictured here, is a prominent example of this, which was granted legal personhood in 2017 after 140 years of advocacy by the Whanganui Iwi, the indigenous Maori tribe with deep relationships and obligations to the river and surrounding land. In my work with my Cherokee community in Oklahoma, we are also enacting our relational responsibilities to the land through indigenous-led conservation and land-based education programs. And so this image is from last April and features our elected tribal officials alongside our elder medicine keepers and National Park Service representatives. The event marked the signing of an agreement between the Cherokee Nation and Buffalo National River in Arkansas that enables Cherokee people to gather plants within the park and, in turn, to influence management practices toward the well-being of the park ecosystem. Within our reservation, we are also working with our elders to conserve tribal lands for cultural purposes, including the education of younger generations in our traditional knowledge. The signing in April also commemorated the establishment of our first medicine preserve in eastern Adair County, where we carry out land-based education activities like the one pictured here. In the Cherokee language, Elohi is our word for earth, our nurturer, the one upon whom we all rely and who gives us life and so many gifts. As our elders teach us, we must never lose sight of this simple yet profound and universal fact that we are all connected through our reliance upon the gifts of the earth and the elements that constitute our collective sustenance and beingness: soil, air, water, and fire. The latter of these is represented principally by the sun, but is also present in each one of us as human beings, in the warmth of our bodies, our spirits. So, how do we tie this back into our mission as an institution of higher education? How else but through the building and sustaining of programs that train the next generation of Indigenous leaders and scientists? Programs that emphasize culturally informed approaches to pressing issues that students can bring back home, but also in which Indigenous students can contribute their relational expertise to the CU community, which in many cases is also home as in homelands. Such programs would benefit our broad mission of innovation in the arts and sciences, not to mention the stated commitment to diversity and inclusion. Fortunately, such a program already exists. The Tribal Climate Leaders Program is an example of a significant effort on campus to address issues that this forum seeks to center. It's a fully funded 2-year program that supports Native American graduate students to become the next generation of tribal environmental leaders. It came about through a collaboration between the North Central Climate Adaptation Science Center and the Center for Native American and Indigenous Studies, garnering financial support from numerous campus entities. And so here are brief synopses of the current cohort's research. I sit on Shelby's committee and co-advise Will with Dr. Lisa Dilling in environmental studies. I want to point out 2 things before I close my remarks. The first builds on my previous point about the significance of this program, not only for the students themselves, but for CU Boulder and our broader region. Programs like this build pathways for translocal solidarity, or the cultivation of local and regional identities and the allegiances to ecosystems and communities that this entails. Through their community-based research, students supported by this program connect local issues to regional and even global conversations. This fosters relationships and opportunities for future collaboration with other students at CU beyond the lab and the classroom. And while this may be a generalizable statement, Indigenous students are the least represented in the academy broadly and in the environmental sciences specifically. The second is that when we think about sustainability and human rights, we need to include in that definition the sustained commitment to innovative programs and research that seek to further these goals. We need much more research like this, and CU Boulder is poised to be a leader in this area with the right investment. Unfortunately, as of right now, this is the first and the last cohort, which is to say that the funding for this program has run its course, although we're actively seeking the resources for its continuation. So if you're looking for ways the public university can fulfill its mission by empowering the next generation of Indigenous leaders and scientists, it's right here. Because the climate crisis is converging with the need for new ways of addressing and thinking about it. Indigenous knowledge systems and their ethical frameworks of relationality offer the world such approaches that underscore the rights of the earth and all life, including humans, and our responsibilities to act as good relatives. Wodo, thank you.